Picture this, a cafeteria full of people, conversations everywhere, laughter. The sound of trays and chairs and 100 different voices filling the room. And in the corner, one person, sitting alone, eating quietly. Eyes down or looking out the window, not talking to anyone, not trying to. What do you think when you see that person? Most people assume something is wrong. That the person is lonely, awkward, socially rejected. That eating alone is a sign of something missing, a missing friend group. A missing social skill, a missing connection to the world. But what if everything you assumed about that person was wrong? What if the person eating alone is not missing anything at all, but is in fact operating from a set of psychological traits that science is only beginning to fully understand? Today, we are going deep into the hidden psychology of people who eat alone. Not the surface level assumptions, the real science. The neuroscience, the personality research, the social psychology, all of it. Because what is happening inside the mind of someone who chooses solitude is far more sophisticated than the world gives it credit for. Welcome to Easy Mind, where we decode the psychology behind the way people think, feel, and behave. Stay with me through this entire video, because the science we are going to cover today will completely reframe the way you see solitude, social energy, and what it actually means to be alone. Let us start with the most fundamental question: why do some people choose to eat alone? The instinctive answer most people reach for is that these individuals cannot find social connection. That aloneness is a default they settle for, not a choice they make. But research tells a far more nuanced story. A landmark study published in the British Journal of Psychology examined the relationship between intelligence, social interaction, and life satisfaction across a large sample of adults. The findings were striking. While most people reported higher life satisfaction when they spent more time socializing, highly intelligent individuals showed the opposite pattern. For them, increased social interaction was actually associated with lower life satisfaction. The researchers proposed what they called the Savannah theory of happiness, the idea that our baseline psychological preferences were shaped by our ancestral environment, where frequent social contact was essential for survival. But for individuals with higher cognitive capacity, the ability to pursue long-term goals and solve complex problems independently means that the evolutionary drive toward constant social connection becomes less psychologically necessary. In simple terms, the more sophisticated a person's inner world, the less they need the outer world to fill it. This does not mean that people who eat alone are smarter than everyone else. It means that for a specific subset of people, solitude is not an absence. It is a resource. Now let us talk about the brain. Neuroscientists have identified two large-scale networks in the human brain that are in many ways opposites of each other. The first is the task-positive network, a system that activates when we are engaged with the external world. Focused attention, goal-directed behavior, social interaction. When you are in a conversation, this network is running. The second is the default mode network, a system that activates when external demands are low. When you are alone with your thoughts, when you are reflecting, imagining, making meaning, processing experience. Here is the critical finding: these two networks are largely mutually exclusive. When one is active, the other tends to quiet down. You cannot fully engage with the external world and fully engage with your inner world at the same time. Read me, for people who eat alone, the default mode network is not just a background process. It is where some of their most important cognitive work happens: reflection, integration, creative synthesis, the processing of complex emotional experiences, the construction of meaning from the events of their lives. When they sit alone in that cafeteria, apparently doing nothing, their brain is running processes that social interaction would interrupt. They are not disconnected from the world, they are connected to a different layer of it. Research from Harvard University found that the default mode network is strongly associated with creativity, self-awareness, empathy, and what psychologists call autobiographical reasoning, the ability to construct a coherent narrative of one's own life and identity. These are not trivial cognitive functions, they are among the most distinctly human things a brain can do. And they require silence to unfold. Now let us look at personality science. The most robust model of human personality that psychologists have developed, the Big Five, also known as the five-factor model, identifies introversion as one of the fundamental dimensions of human character. And the science of introversion has been profoundly misrepresented in popular culture. Introversion is not shyness, it is not social anxiety, it is not a fear of people. It is a difference in how the nervous system processes stimulation. Neuroscientist Elaine Aron, building on the work of Hans Eysenck, found that introverted individuals have a nervous system that reaches its optimal arousal level at lower thresholds of external stimulation than extroverted individuals. This means that social environments, which are inherently high in stimulation, require more cognitive and neurological resources for introverts than for extroverts. Eating alone for an introverted person is not avoidance, it is regulation. It is the nervous system finding its optimal operating environment. The quiet table in the corner is not a place of defeat. It is a place where the brain can finally breathe. Susan Cain, in her research on introversion, described this as the introvert's need for restorative niches, environments that restore rather than deplete psychological and neurological resources. For many people who eat alone, that solitary meal is not empty, it is regenerative. But introversion alone does not fully explain the psychology of people who eat alone. Because not all of them are introverts in the classical sense. Some are highly sensitive people, a term coined by psychologist Elaine Aron to describe individuals whose nervous systems process sensory and emotional information more deeply than average. Approximately 15 to 20% of the population carries this trait, and it exists across the introversion-extroversion spectrum. For highly sensitive people, a crowded lunch environment is not just socially demanding. It is neurologically demanding. The noise, the movement, the multiple simultaneous conversations, the emotional energy of the room, all of it is processed more deeply, which means it is more exhausting. Eating alone is not antisocial for these individuals, it is necessary. It is how they function without burning out. Research published in the journal Brain and Behavior found that highly sensitive individuals show greater activation in brain regions associated with awareness, empathy, and complex information processing, including the insula, the anterior cingulate cortex, and the mirror neuron system. These are not deficits, they are markers of a nervous system that is working at a higher level of depth and complexity. The person eating alone in the corner may be processing the world more deeply than anyone else in the room. They just need quiet to do it. Now let us address the social dimension, because this is where the psychology becomes most complex. Because behind that solitude there may be a default mode network running at full capacity. There may be a nervous system finally finding its optimal state. There may be a person who has built a rich and complex interior life that does not require an audience. There may be someone who is, in the truest sense, completely at home in themselves. And that is not something to pity, that is something to understand. And perhaps, if you are honest with yourself, something to learn from. If this video gave you a new way of seeing solitude or yourself, drop a comment below. Do you eat alone by choice? Has solitude ever been a source of strength for you rather than a sign of something missing? I read every comment, every single one. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone is show them that the thing the world misread about them was actually a gift. Subscribe to Easy Mind for new psychology videos every week. And I will see you in the next one. Read me, there is a difference between solitude and loneliness. And it is one of the most important psychological distinctions a person can make. Loneliness is a state of painful disconnection, the feeling of wanting social connection and not having it. It is associated with elevated cortisol levels, disrupted sleep, weakened immune function, and significantly increased risk of depression and anxiety. The research on the health consequences of loneliness is among the most consistent in all of social psychology. Solitude, by contrast, is a chosen state of being alone, one that, for the right person in the right context, produces the opposite of loneliness. Research from the University of Rochester found that voluntary solitude, time alone that is chosen rather than imposed, is associated with increased self-awareness, greater emotional regulation, enhanced creativity, and a stronger sense of personal identity. The key variable is not whether a person is alone. It is whether they are alone by choice. People who eat alone and are thriving are not lonely people in denial. They are people who have developed what psychologists call solitude competence, the ability to be with oneself without distress. to find the alone state productive and even pleasurable rather than threatening. And this competence, it turns out, is one of the markers of high psychological maturity. Developmental psychologist Winnicott described the capacity to be alone, particularly in the presence of others, such as a crowded cafeteria, as one of the most sophisticated achievements of emotional development. The person who can sit in a room full of people and feel complete within themselves has, in Winnicott's framework, achieved something that many people never fully reach. They do not need the room to validate them, they do not need the noise to fill them. They are, in the deepest sense of the word, self-sufficient at the level of identity. But here is something important that the research also tells us. People who eat alone are not necessarily people who want to be alone forever. Many of them have deep and meaningful connections. They simply curate those connections with unusual intentionality. A study from the University of Michigan found that individuals who regularly spend time in voluntary solitude tend to have fewer but significantly deeper social relationships than those who are more constantly socially engaged. They are not avoiding connection, they are being selective about it. They are conserving their social energy for the relationships and interactions that genuinely matter to them, rather than distributing it broadly across surface-level interactions. In the economics of human connection, they are not poor. They are simply investing differently. There is also a growing body of research on what psychologists call self-concept clarity, the degree to which a person has a clear, consistent, and stable sense of who they are. Studies consistently show that individuals who spend regular time in solitude develop stronger self-concept clarity than those who are rarely alone. They know themselves better. They are less susceptible to social pressure, less likely to change their behavior based on who is watching, less dependent on external validation for their sense of worth. The person eating alone is, in many cases, someone who has done the interior work that social noise makes difficult. They know what they think before they are told what to think. They know what they feel before someone else names it for them. That is not isolation, that is integration. So the next time you see someone sitting alone at a table, eating quietly, seemingly unbothered by the world around them, I want you to resist the first assumption.